You're watching The New Stack Makers, a podcast for people who develop, deploy, and manage at-scale software. For more information and articles about at-scale technologies, please visit thenewstack.io. Now enjoy the show.
Millions of developers use Docker to build, share, and run applications with an integrated, reliable, and secure workflow that accelerates app delivery from code to the cloud. See how at docker.com. Insight Partners is an investor in Docker and TNS.
Hey Scott, how you doing?
Alex, doing well. Good to see
Great.
you again.
Good to see you. Here with Scott Johnston, longtime Docker veteran, CEO. How did you start out at Docker? What year was that?
Joined February 2014.
February 2014.
20 of us, open source engineers. Solomon, founder. Ben
Yeah.
Golub, CEO at the time. I was
Yeah.
leading product.
Where were you before?
It's at Puppet.
Oh, you were a Puppet.
So discovered Docker while I was at Puppet. Because 3 months after Docker, so Docker open source, March 2013.
Yeah.
3 months after that, it started showing up in the Puppet accounts.
Oh, it did?
And I was like, what is this? And dug in, and it's like, oh, this is going to change things. Because we were trying to solve similar things, right? So Puppet was trying to make environments consistent, but it was doing it from the outside in by automation, configuration.
Yeah.
And Docker, of course, completely flipped them all around and says, no, make the images immutable, capture that, and then ship the container. So it was a completely different way of solving the problem.
Yeah.
And it's like, I got to get on that train. So I joined 6 months after that.
Huh. So, are you a software engineer by trade?
By training, and then I was a software engineer up till my first several jobs out of school before business school were software engineering. So, worked for Sun Microsystems, worked in Japan for a while as a software engineer.
So you must have been starting to do some software development when you came to Docker. I mean, in a managerial role.
They don't let me touch production code anymore. No, so I was running product at Puppet, and so they asked me to come to Docker to run product at Docker.
There.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. But they don't let me touch production code anymore.
Okay, good.
I still participate in the hackathons, and we have the Advent of Code every year, so I still dust off my coding, but I should not do production code.
It's funny because I get in trouble if I would get in trouble if I went onto the site and change something in an article. My editor-in-chief would be like, what are you doing?
Put that down. Yeah.
But yeah, so you must have really changed your perspective on application development back then. I mean, do you remember anything in particular that?
Well, I'm remembering, these platform changes, right? They come about when it's not a 10% or a 15% change, but it's like a 10x change, right? And I could see in Docker just how radically simplified making environments consistent was, right? Because in Puppet you had to learn Puppet DSL, you had to set up the Puppet server, you had to put the agents on the node, like getting there was really, really hard.
Yeah.
And I could see with Docker, it's like, oh, Docker file, this looks like a bash set of bash commands, like, oh, we're done.
Yeah.
And I could just see the step function in simplicity was just going to blow things up in a good way. So now it's all at that early stage of the market. It was super early, but it was 10x better than anything else at the time.
Yeah, it kind of felt like magic in a way. And that's why early technologies often feel that are significant early technologies.
That's right.
So I think now, what have been the significant technologies along with Docker over the years, right? I think cloud services, they predated Docker, but they enabled in many ways what you could do with Docker.
That's right. Well, they brought this whole notion of on-demand and elasticity, right, which was getting exciting around the VMs. And I think when Docker and containers came on, it took advantage. It really took advantage of cloud properties, right? I'll say Kubernetes, of course, or orchestration in general, and then Kubernetes kind of capitalized on it in terms of okay, how do you deploy and orchestrate containers at scale automatically?
Right.
Because that just opened up oh, now I can take this one container and I can automatically replicate it across 100 nodes just by changing a YAML file. It really put powerful automation tools in the hands of operators that they didn't have before.
Yeah.
So those are a couple examples that I think they contributed to this wave
Uh-huh.
of where we are today. Right?
Yeah, and so the next magical thing I think that's arrived is what?
So GenAI,
Yeah.
right? I mean, not to jump on the meme of the moment, but everything we see internally, because we're using it internally, but also within our community, it really does have that 10x type property, that 10x type feel to it. Right now, there's so many things to figure out. Like, the market is super early, but boy, just the early signs are so exciting.
So if I think about the state of Docker today, right, and that's really what I want to talk with you about, I think of all those things. I think of the cloud. I think of container technologies overall and how they're basically the foundation for cloud native technologies.
Yeah.
Right?
Anything deployed to the cloud today is deployed in container.
Right. I think of like new emerging technologies like WebAssembly, which you all have accepted.
Yep.
And then there's the large language models, and the one constant that I hear from you over the past 2 days is speed. And that seems to be always been a theme for you. But how does that change now? Because I wonder how fast it's ever going to get. Right?
Yeah. It's an
know.
interesting axis, right? And you might think that sometimes speed and time can be different dimensions, but the emphasis is like, how do you just allow the devs to spend time on what they do best, right?
Yeah.
Which is creating and innovating. That's what they want to do. That's how we all got in the business, right? We got in the business because we hate black boxes. We like knowing what's going inside the box. We like tinkering. We like figuring out the puzzle. And anything that is not that, right? Like, let's just remove that. I mean, the Docker debug is a good example of this, right? So, not to talk about our show too much, but to get into a container and start debugging had so much overhead associated with it that they'd spend more time setting it up than actually solving the problem. And I think today on stage you also heard very, very authentically that GenAI doesn't take jobs. It's going to take the repetitive toil and the repetitive code off developers' plates so they can focus on, like, okay, how can I solve this problem more cleverly, if that's a word, or how can I solve this problem more elegantly? And wow, that's a bigger problem than I had time to think about before, but now I have the time back because of GenAI to go think about that problem. So it's speed and time, Alex, and I think they can be different sides of the same coin in some sense, right?
I'm not convinced that GenAI will not take jobs away, but I'm not convinced about it either. I thought about this one during some of the discussions today.
Yeah.
And this is kind of an angle, on our discussion, but it gets back to your focus on speed and everything else. But if people are going to be focused on finding the gray areas, right? And do you need just as many people to do that?
Yeah.
Or is because the rate of application development going to be so much more voluminous?
Right.
That'll keep the people employed as developers.
Yeah. I think all those factors result in more developers coming into the market. There's going to be more demand for apps that'll just suck up that supply. You may have heard of this analogy before, but there used to be a thought of, like, well, if we just make highways wider, then there'll be no traffic jams because we'll have plenty of highway capacity. But it turns out every time you add a lane, more cars, it's not supply constrained. It's not highway supply constrained because there's always more demand, right? And I think if we look at the history of technology, that's always been the case when a new 10x type functionality comes on the scene, right? So to your point, are some jobs going to be replaced? Perhaps some, but new jobs are going to be created, right? So let's roll it back as another example. So it used to be all developers were assembly coders, right? So when higher level languages like C came along, like, did all the assembly coding go away? No, but the market for C developers just blew up, right? And then Python came along and interpreted languages, it blew up further, and now the low code, like every time you simplify with an abstraction, it just expands the market. And then on the demand side for applications, it's always wanting more, It's always wanting more. The stat we have, which we've shared before, I think it's from IDC, that there's a demand for more than 750 million apps in the next 2 years, which is more apps that have been written in the entire 40-year history of IT.
Yeah.
And we're not surprised by that, because every time you kind of simplify and give powerful tools to a creative class, and developers are a creative class, like they figure out fantastic, innovative ways to apply that we a priori didn't see coming. So no, I think it's going to be a multiplier. I think it's going to be an expander.
I wanted to ask about this idea, though, too, about what Solomon said in the early years. He talked about, making the internet programmable, right? Mm-hmm. And this concept that it seems like with what we're seeing from out of your discussion is like that mission is still there, right? Because and I think what you just said about developers speaks to that.
Yes, that's right. And if we roll back again, maybe an analogy of prior generations, right? So there was distributed computing in the late 80s, early 90s through the command line. Like there was Waze and Gopher and FTP, and you could jump around and look at these remote resources, and they were networked together. Yeah. HTTP, as you know, was originally a command line tool. Like it didn't have a browser, right? And people were hopping around, but it was a very small class of graduate students in CS that could take advantage of that. Yeah. And then Andreessen and Mosaic at the University of Illinois came on with the browser that put a graphical interface on top of that and just made it as easy as a click to jump from that server to this server. In fact, you didn't have to know you were jumping server to server, right? You were just clicking on links, right? And look what. I mean, the 90s happened, right? The web as we know it happened by simplifying tech that was already there, but just too difficult for normal humans to use. And Solomon's vision, I agree with your observation, Alex. It is still very much alive, and each of these new abstractions, GenAI being the latest, just simplifies the access of doing that for more and more developers. Again, maybe just talking about day one a bit, you perhaps saw this in the next generation builds, right? Where the developer can still use Docker build locally, and then by the flip of a switch, they don't have to change anything else. All of a sudden, they're now taking advantage of servers in the cloud, but they don't have to provision anything. They don't have to secure anything. They don't have to set up a VPN between their local laptop and the cloud. So that's an example of making the internet and the interface of the internet just simpler and more easily accessible. Because a dev wants to stay in their environment. They want to stay in their language. They want to stay in their IDE. They don't want to jump out and set up a bunch of infrastructure to go program that remote service. They just want to do it.
Yeah, they just want to do that. So what does that mean for the future of Docker and the future of containers? The footprint of a container, the size of containers are getting bigger, especially with LLMs. What does that say for the future of containers and how how you may need to adapt Docker?
Sure.
I heard, the web GPUs that you're developing seems to be a step toward that.
Super cool, right?
Yeah.
Well, so web GPU, it's related. It I'll say, continues to invest in the promise of portability, right? Because today, if you do GPU local development, you're pinning it to your local laptop, and you try to move that to the cloud, you got to rewrite it.
Yeah.
Okay, don't do that, right? So write it once, and then ship it to the cloud, and now it can take advantage of the cloud GPU stack, which might have 10 times the GPUs as your local laptop, but you don't have, as a developer, you don't have to worry about that. Right? So that's an example of, it goes back to your previous question of just simplify that stuff. So the developer just writes once to a GPU API that is reusable wherever.
Yeah.
Right? In terms of your kind of just now question, and we talked about this last year with our WASM announcement. Yeah. Our company, when we went through the recapitalization restructuring 4 years ago, we kind of committed and pivoted to focus on developers, and we committed to serve them wherever they are. And that at the time was Linux containers, Linux and Windows containers. But we've seen that expand from Linux and Windows containers to serverless functions to WASM to now, GenAI will produce some other artifact potentially. And so containers, much like mainframes are still with us, containers will continue to be with us, VMs are still with us. So containers are going to continue to be a hugely important artifact. but never bet against technology from continuing to change and continue to find ways that are more secure, lighter, faster. And I think WASM is a candidate for that. Certainly serverless continues to grow. And you and I will be here talking about the next thing, Alex, in 3 to 5 years,
for
right?
Sure.
But our intent is like wherever that developer is, make it easy for them to take advantage of that new technology, much like the GPU. We're making it easy for them to take advantage of GPUs in the cloud without them having to think about it.
And so that relieves me questions about like container management space, which is growing rapidly. I saw some data from that Michael Cote shared on his email newsletter about the it's growing. It's just growing tremendously.
Yeah.
Into the multi-billion-dollar market, really. And so that I wonder. I look at that. I mean, we're out about technology, not really about the business side. But I think about that in terms of the exponential increase in what Docker might needs to do to like keep up with that pace of that market. And and it seems to me what you're saying here is that it comes back to your fundamentals and focusing on the developer and where they are. Do you see any particular areas that are growing particularly strong that speak to that growth that Cote was talking about?
So I can share our conversation. So as you know, the container management space before the reset 4 years ago, we had our own offering there,
right?
And now we don't, right?
Yeah.
So all of those, which were potentially competitors 4 or 5 years ago, they're now friends, right?
Yeah.
So the developers build containerized images, containerized applications with Docker Desktop, and they deploy to all these different management stacks. So they are beneficiaries of our developer activity.
That's a good delineation
right?
to make.
Right?
That's really important.
Yeah, it is. Like we go from Docker Desktop to AWS EKS, or Docker Desktop to Red Hat OpenShift, or Docker Desktop to Rancher, like
VMware Tanzu, right?
All of it, right? And so, fantastic. So that's just from a relationship and partner ecosystem standpoint, that's been really helpful. To your question, it's always fascinates me, Alex, like the Gibson quote, like the future's here, it's just not evenly distributed. And so we in tech think like, oh, containers, cloud, like pervasive, everyone's using it, right? But we go into our large customers, particularly those in regulated industries, and we'll see one business unit that is onboard containers and container management tools, typically in the cloud. But boy, the other 9 business units are just getting started.
Yeah.
And so I think the driver of growth, going back to Cote's note, is that there's a later stage of the market that is just now saying like, wow, this is fantastic for any type of application, .NET, Java, legacy, Node, and let's get on board. And there's a lot of users there. And so as they onboard their applications to the tune of like not hundreds, but thousands, if not tens of thousands of applications, that's driving the growth in container management. So maybe coming back to your question about Docker, a lot of that growth is not net new applications, it's modernizing legacy apps. And so there's an opportunity for us to help those developers that are sitting with a 10-year-old application that's still delivering value, but they want to take it to the cloud to help lower the friction of containerizing that.
You made that shift away from container management. What you're saying is Docker Desktop enables a developer to work with those container management.
Deploy to those, right? Deploy to those. And then we could help accelerate this growth that you're citing from Cody's note by giving developers even more tools to understand their legacy apps, containerize them automatically. In fact, there's good GenAI use cases around this as well. And then package them in containers and ship them to the container management tools.
So, if I was going to think of Docker as a hub, as a platform, or maybe it is just Docker Hub, is that what it is and will be? Is like that hub is where you find these tools for Docker extensions, for example?
Yeah.
Is that your future?
Our vision, thank you for that. Our vision is that Hub can be that marketplace for any and all developer tools and content. And we're seeing that already happen. That's not just wishful thinking. So it already has Linux containers, Windows containers, WASM objects, serverless functions. It already has architectures of x86 and ARM and mainframe and RISC-V or RISC-V. It already has extensions and tools and container images. So it's already very well populated with a very heterogeneous, broad and deep set of artifacts and tools for development teams. And I think as long as we keep it open and lower the friction to add to it, like it's just going to continue to grow like that.
So as you kind of move, my last question, as you move into this next generation, right, of AI and ML, like, you know, what will help Docker like become like a much larger organization than it is today?
So as an ecosystem, there's 20 million monthly actives pulling from Hub and 15 million registered developers. But I think you mean the corporate entity.
Yeah,
is that correct?
Of the size of the company.
Okay.
But yeah, I know there's a lot of
the
users
ecosystem
out
is
there.
big. I mean,
Yeah.
we're celebrating
Yeah.
that today here at DockerCon. So there's the reason 4 years later we're growing is that organizations are realizing that developers are no longer this backroom persona that you can just throw whatever at and they'll have to deal with it. They're realizing developers make the architectural decisions for the application and for the tools that then drive, in some cases, billions of dollars of spend later.
Yeah.
And it took a while, but organizations have now connected those dots. And as a result, we're seeing, at least in our business, a continued shift in spend that prioritizes the developer experience, that prioritizes giving not just a great developer experience, but a high velocity, very productive one. And there's still a lot of work to do there. I mean, today's conference, the last 2 days of conference shows you where we're investing in helping developers go faster, helping them deliver safe applications automatically, right? Versus having to get the alert and go explore the CVE database right? Yeah. And our conviction is that continuing to deliver more and more products into that space will result in growth in the business. We'll be able to grow customer base, grow the customer spend with Docker, and hire more engineers and just keep that loop going. Even just today, looking at all the use cases that, 3 or 4 years ago, before LLMs really became a thing, were unheard of, right? There's entire categories that are being formed as you and I sit here, and those categories are either right where we are or they're right adjacent to us that we can provide product and great experiences into. So, future's bright. Both need some sunglasses, Alex.
Well, thanks, Scott, for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you for the questions, Alex. Always good to see you. I'm glad we're back face to face.
Yes, definitely.
If you like this video, please give us a thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more videos like this, you can always subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're on all the major social media platforms. You can always find us at thenewstack.io. We hope to see you soon.